Today's event will focus on discussing and analyzing Mexico's constitutional reforms and their implications to the U.S.-Mexico bilateral relationship. We have an incredible lineup of experts that will share their insights on the judicial reform, the electoral reform, the reform to eliminate independent agencies, as well as many others. We are deeply grateful to all of our experts and speakers for joining us today.
I will now leave the microphone to Maria Amparo Hernandez. She's a judge at the Federal Circuit. Maria Amparo, nice to hear from you.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for the invitation to the Wilson Center for being here, and very honored to be sharing this space with you. Well, yes, as Francisco was saying, today is a very sad day. It was a very difficult night for us. It is very difficult for me to be here right now, knowing that after what happened last night, my days and the days of many of all of the Mexican judges are counted. So I'll make my best effort to give you my take on what's happening with the judicial reform. I don't think I have to repeat what has been said about the contents of the judicial reform. I believe that with what has been said the minutes before, we have an oversight, a very good oversight of what happened this week with the judiciary in Mexico. But I'd like to stress a point that hasn't been said, and it's not only and it's very worrisome. It's worrisome not only because of the contents of the judicial reform that have already been described, but I think that what happened on the last weeks, and particularly what happened yesterday, the way it developed is also very worrisome. The way the legislative process was rushed, the way the dialogues were developed theatrically, the no reason deliberation, we can because we can, we do because we can. And yesterday, some things that happened, like cartel-like things, like disappearing senators and hours without knowing where their whereabouts, having to move the protests, the breaking into the Congress, the having to... All those things, I think, that also are very revealing. Not only are the contents of the judicial reform revealing, but the way it was developed over the last weeks, and particularly what happened yesterday and has been recorded in many media, is very worrisome. Because what happened seems to confirm many of the hypotheses that were discarded by the official reasons given to push the judicial reform, and seem to confirm the hypothesis that the rush is to close a cycle with a very strong concentration of powers, which is, of course, very worrisome. So today we wake up to a new reality that we must continue to try to understand, not only how we got here, but it's very difficult to, from right now, foresee where we will going. I'll try to concentrate the last minutes, but it was very important for me to stress that the way things developed is also very, very revealing. What's next? What's next after what happened yesterday? Well, I think we can resume it and keep rushing. Not only we rushed the last weeks, and we rushed last night, and we rushed last week at the House of Deputies, and yesterday in the Senate, but we'll keep rushing. We'll keep rushing because today we're rushing the local legislative approvals. We'll be rushing the publication. And when all this is done, we'll be rushing the next election. Next election is supposed to be convened in a couple of weeks. And in a couple of weeks, it's very soon, and it's a very, very, very titanic election. In a couple of weeks, we are supposed to see the Senate convene for candidates to raise their hands and say who wants to be a judge in a system that will not have, by that time, of course, statute regulation that is already acknowledged by the Senate, who has drafted that will not be an impediment to get the election done. So what we have right now enacted in the Constitution will serve as a sole basis towards the election that is starting in a couple of weeks. We'll be convening for elections for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of federal judges of different levels, of different specialities, and experimenting, and I don't like the word, but I think that's what we're going to be confronting, a very big experiment, but in real life and with real consequences. Let me give you a contrast. When Mexico several years ago replaced its criminal justice system and more recently its labor justice system, it took years, very long years of preparation to get us starting in a new system. This is practically a total overhaul of the system that in a couple of weeks will be starting. Who will be our next judges? We don't know. We start a very, very bumpy road in totally uncharted territory because none of this, as you know, has been tried in any other country. Maybe we can see some similitude with something in Bolivia, maybe something with some state elections in the United States, but nothing of these dimensions have been tried in comparative law. So it is an experiment which cost will be on the country, on all of us. We will be starting in a few weeks this election. Who will be the candidates? We don't know. What we do know is that the standards have been lowered for me to a very worrisome manner, considering also the very poor control that in Mexico we have in our legal system education. It is very easy in Mexico to have a law degree. You can have a law degree in a couple of years with institutes that nobody knows, or they just popped up from one day to the other. And we've seen that from a long time ago, and we've seen that recently with persons that hold high office posts today. We will see many people trying to be a federal judge, a federal magistrate, an appeals court judge. And we will have, yes, they introduced in the process a technical committee that will evaluate, but let me tell you my reserve with that technical committee. You can put a technical committee or you can put whatever you want in the middle of the process, but we cannot change that the starting point and the deciding point for who gets on the ballot is a political decision taken by political bodies. So the technical evaluation, I don't see it can neutralize all of the problems that are, because the starting and the finishing point are political bodies. And let me tell you in contrast, we have 30 years in trial and error of exams on studying profiles on what are we going to ask candidates in very serious exams and rigorous process we have to go through to have this office. And it has been a very difficult road. And it has been a road in which there have been so many discussions of what is important that a candidate to judge proves that he knows and that what he can do or she can do before holding this office. And so today we're going to start in 15 days an election with technical committees that are going to be convened for 1 week to another with 5 persons named by we don't know who, with we don't know what profile, with who are going to ask the candidates what. It's very difficult for me to understand how a process of cumulative knowledge of 30 years will be able to flow and deliver satisfactory candidates in the few days that they will have to evaluate. I think that will be very, very difficult, and albeit that comes okay, then there will be the record, the lottery, or however you call it. Because if there is more demand than the post that there's an officer that can make the election manageable, all these candidates that pass the checklist will be in a lottery. So that makes it also very complicated. it's very difficult for me to foresee who will be in the ballot. Yes, judges like me that are now in office have been given we may call it an automatic pass to the ballot if we so decide to. But I find it very difficult to think that there will be many of my colleagues who want to be on that ballot. We have to take a personal decision if we want to compete, and we have to go to an election in which we know that we compete against a very long, maybe even more than 6-year long narrative, public narrative, that we are the villains of all the movies of what is happening and all the flaws that have in the Mexican system. I don't know how that will flow. That will be a decision each of us will have to take personally, but I think it will be very difficult for many of us to take the decision to be there, and it is not the automatic pass is only to the ballot. The possibilities of winning with all these adversities, I think, are very low. And let me also say this, I find this, well, very sad, because it's a lot of accumulated knowledge, a lot of accumulated experience with all the flaws and all the things we would have to get better at, that will be simply dumped and start again. The election